I'm looking at all of the pieces because my experience over, all of these decades at this point is rarely is the root cause aligned with where the symptom is showing up. Sometimes it is. Like, I can't say it's never that because that would not be true either. But I would say it's like, it's kind of the whole Pareto principle 80-20 rule, right? That 80% of the time, it's actually sitting someplace else.
Yeah.
And often where we want to find it is where we're most comfortable fixing things.
Are you feeling overwhelmed, stuck, or uncertain about how to grow your business without sacrificing what really matters most? Welcome to The Business You Really Want, the show for women ready to build a sustainable, fully aligned business. Aligned with what, you ask? You, your values, your life. Seriously, it is possible. I'm Tonya Kubo, and along with business advisor extraordinaire Gwen Bortner, we're here to show you how. Your business is constantly giving you information. It just doesn't always speak in complete sentences, and sometimes doesn't even speak in fragments. But today we are going to talk about how you can read your business like a system instead of reading it like a long list of to-dos. This way you can identify the real issue quickly and make decisions with confidence. And as always, I am Tonya Kubo. I am here with my co-hostess with the mostest, Gwen Bortner. And Gwen, I know this is something that you deal with all the time. You have dealt with it for decades. And so I want you to kick us off and tell me why it is that you think the average CEO misreads what their business needs.
So there's lots of reasons it happens. The first, we've talked about it before, is you kind of can't read the label inside the jar. We're often too close to things to actually be able to see the bigger picture of what's going on. But one of the other things that we don't talk about nearly as much is we have inherent assumptions that are so inherent, we don't know they're assumptions, right? I mean, we take them as fact. They're, I mean,
it's the very definition of implicit bias, right?
Right.
If you knew you had it, it wouldn't be implicit.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And so we have those, inherent assumptions, these implicit biases that are directing choices and thoughts and behaviors that we can't even see ourselves because it's like you said, it's the nature of the whole thing. And often some of these, and we talk about this quite a bit, you and I, both privately and on this podcast, of how often you'll say something to me of like, no one else thinks that way. And I'm like, what do you mean no one else thinks that way? Of course everyone thinks that way. It's the most logical thing in the universe. And you're like, no.
Only to you. Only to you, Gwen.
It's not. And so it's those kinds of issues that we're making choices, decisions, taking action, all of those based on those things. And so that becomes the biggest problem. And then the third thing I would say, which, like the one I just said really to me is the number one. That's the biggest issue. Back to, I can't do it for myself either, even though I'm really good at doing it for other people. I can't do it for myself, right?
So just for clarity, you're saying the number one issue is you can't read the label from inside the jar. You're too close to the situation?
Yeah. Well, I was going to say the assumptions, the implicit bias.
Okay.
Number two really is you can't read the label inside the jar. Back to you're too close to things, right? And then the third, I think, is it's so much easier to take actions on the things that are obvious. But the things that are obvious usually are more tactical, and often the tactical thing that we're fixing is more like putting a Band-Aid on an infection. It'll help it not get more infected, but it's not necessarily actually solving the infection.
Right.
Right. So it helps manage it a little bit, but it's not really getting to the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And back to a lot of the time, the reason that we don't actually see the infection is back to number one. We're making assumptions to say, no, that it's always been there. It's always that. That's the way it is. That's just fine.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Or this is the only way we can do this. This is the only, this is the only answer we've got. So to me, it's those three things really in that order. Like I said, the assumptions is the biggest issue because we can't see it. Right.
Yeah.
This is one of those things every once in a while I'll come across someone who's like, yeah, I don't work with anyone outside of my business because they're projecting all of their things on it. It's like, yes. And, I can see where you may have had that experience a lot because that does happen a lot out in the world. But outside perspective is always important. Maybe you don't need it constantly. Maybe you don't need it all the time.
Right.
But that outside perspective is really important. But back to they need to understand you and your business enough for it to actually be valuable. And like I said, it's both you and your business. Most of the time when you're providing outside perspective, like I would say 75, 80% of the time, it's less about the business and it's more about me that you're
Right.
that you're giving the insight on, right?
Yeah.
So it's not just like, oh, I know your business and I know what you're doing. It's like you got to have somebody that's taking time to build a relationship with you. And then it gets to we're often too close to things to really be able to see things clearly. That's related, but a little bit different. And we tend to focus on the things that are most obvious because why would we not? And sometimes they are the things that need to be fixed. But what we forget, I was using this example with someone yesterday, that we keep wondering why there's a fire starting in the corner, but we don't move the magnifying glass that catches the sun every day.
That's a great analogy.
Right?
I haven't heard that one.
I know, it was a new one. I came up with it yesterday. I was really proud of myself.
You should be. You should be.
But it's like, oh yeah, we put the fire out. God, it started again and it's like, okay, there's more going on here, right? And I think that's the other problem is that we get focused on the big urgent thing and we miss the subtle things that are actually leading to the big urgent thing.
Yeah, I was gonna say because I see that a lot. I mean, I hear you talk about it all the time, right? But I see it in your clients. I see it in my clients. I see it in my peers that constantly falling victim to the fire and the true priorities, what's really important, constantly gets in the back burner. And, and this is how I always say about the days bleeding into the weeks, bleeding into the months, bleeding into the years. And then, it's New Year's Eve and you haven't crossed one thing off your very important to-do list for the year.
Right.
So I think you've given us a really good perspective on why CEOs, even if it's a business they have founded, right? Even if we're talking about owner-operators, entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, why they misread the information their business is trying to give them. So now I want to just kind of turn it to you and I want to ask, what is your approach to diagnosing a business's problem as the person who comes in from the outside? So they have already said, I know I can't read the label from outside the jar. Or maybe they were like, dude, I read the label and it's just not like, I'm following the instructions. It's just not doing the thing I expect it to do. You come in from the outside. What is your approach to diagnosing?
So this is, do you have your context matters thing? I have
accountability. I don't. I have my accountability
one today.
No, it's in the dishwasher.
See, mine is too. But this is where context matters because part of it is understanding where we are in the process. So, like, if the fire is going in the corner, we actually do need to get the fire out.
Yeah. Well, I actually want to take a step back from that piece. Like we're going to get there. I know where you're going and we're going to get there.
Okay.
But I mean, like the framework. So let me tell you what I think I've seen you do. And then you can tell me if what I see is what I think I see, or if I'm running around with my own implicit bias here. So I see people come to you with symptoms. I've got this problem. I've got that problem. We'll just call it a lead problem because I'm in marketing and this is my language. I throw out a sports analogy, but I don't do the sports ball. So they come to you and there's these symptoms, right? I have a lead problem. And you're like, okay, well, like, so you're not making any sales. You're not doing this. And they're like, no, I'm making sales. I'm doing this. So when was your last new client? Oh, I got a client yesterday. And you're like, okay, this doesn't sound like a lead problem to me, right?
Right.
But so you point out that like, okay, what they came to you with, right? That's like a symptom. And then you ask them these questions and then undoubtedly we get to, the core issue or what ops people love to call the root cause, right? Root cause discovery. Then once you unearth that root cause, I feel like constraints always end up coming up, right? They're like, oh, okay, if that's a problem, I'm going to fix it here. And you're like, whoa, given what you've told me, it sounds like this has to get fixed. This, like there's a problem here. Like maybe you don't have enough staff over there, or you've got staff who are focusing too much time on the symptom and not enough time on this root cause. But you start listing kind of all these constraints that are in place. And then once you have a picture of like, okay, we have the root cause, here are the constraints in place, then you start to say, okay, given that information, it seems like you should start here. Like this is your point of highest leverage. So that's the framework I think I see as you go about diagnosing. Am I missing something or does that sound about right? And if it does sound right, tell us why it makes sense.
So part of this is, I'd love to say I know exactly how it happens every time, but I don't. And part of it is, I'll just call it my secret juju. And you're the one to help me identify that I often see several dots in a line that to the rest of the world, the dots don't even exist. They're just invisible, right? But I'm always listening for the thing. It's kind of like, remember the old Sesame Street thing about one of these things doesn't belong here?
Yep.
I'm always listening. Yeah, exactly. It's like a little thing in your head, aren't you? So I'm always watching or listening for the thing that doesn't quite belong. And when I was 4, I was really good at the what doesn't belong here. But I think most 4-year-olds actually are good with the what doesn't belong here. But I've always been good with the what doesn't belong here. What's the thing that's not quite fitting into the picture the way that it's supposed to? And so one of the things is I'm willing to look at the entire business. Using your leads example, it's like, okay, so let's talk about that. And then let's talk about your finances and your this and your that and your people and your processes and your systems and your technology. And so part of what's a little different about where I come in and how I'm able to find it is I'm not looking necessarily where the problem is manifesting.
Right. Whereas let's just use the you and me example here.
Yeah.
If you hire me today, you get a different experience. But let's pretend you hire Tonya before she met Gwen. You hire, 8 years ago, Tonya, and you're talking to a marketing consultant. You tell me you have a leads problem. I'm going to investigate your marketing engine because that's my area of expertise. Yep. And you told me you have a leads problem. I'm going to trust you to be the expert in your business. Where you go, okay, we can have that conversation and you know enough about marketing to like pull that thread. But then you talk about finances, you talk about sales, you talk about fulfillment, you talk about team. Even if they don't have a team, you kind of talk them through all the functions of their business to see if maybe, since they're like a one-person show, is there a function of their business that's been neglected? Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yeah, exactly. I'm looking at all of the pieces because my experience over, all of these decades at this point is rarely is the root cause aligned with where the symptom is showing up. Sometimes it is. Like, I can't say it's never that because that would not be true either. But I would say it's like, it's kind of the whole Pareto principle 80-20 rule, right? That 80% of the time, It's actually sitting someplace else.
Yeah.
And often where we want to find it is where we're most comfortable fixing things.
Mm.
And so if it's a leads problem and we've functionally done well in our business because we've actually been able to sell things and whatnot, then we want to fix the marketing
Yeah.
because it's a leads problem. It's a marketing problem. I want to fix the marketing. And often, I'm totally making up this scenario. I don't even have a real one in my head right now. But often what we'll find is like, oh, you see it as a leads problem because you're not getting as much revenue as you want to have, and you don't have as much revenue as you want to have because you're not actually able to cash flow the business. And the reason you can't actually cash flow the business is this expense problem that has nothing to do with marketing.
Right.
Nothing to do with marketing. But we've gone, and so, but by asking that broader question is how, and looking at all of the areas is where I start, digging through and saying, oh yeah, no, I can see why you feel like that's a leads problem. That's not a leads problem.
Yeah. So now I want to go where I think the listener really wants us to go at this point, because they're like, yeah, that's all fine and good, but what do I do about it? Because the listener is me. Let's be real here. And also where I think you were taking us just a moment ago, which is, okay, that's all fine and good. And what do I do about it, right? Like what do I evaluate first? If I, as a CEO, intuitively go to the wrong place, if I'm always looking at symptoms and I'm not digging far enough for root cause and I'm too close to the problem, what do I do next? And I'm going to be the one here, Gwen. You don't have to be the balloon popper today. I will be the balloon popper. And I will be the one to tell the listener that there is almost never a one-size-fits-all order of evaluation. We wish there was, because you know what? We would make millions if there was a one-size-fits-all, because we would just sell that, and Gwen would sleep until noon every day, and I would be up at 4 a.m. but instead in my garden instead of at my desk, and our lives would be great because the money would just come rolling in. But there is no one-size-fits-all order of evaluation. However, the first place to look, or where it begins, is usually in one of the following places. It's either with the people, and you're a people too. It's with your processes. It's with your priorities. Or it's with your performance indicators, the numbers you're actually tracking to tell you whether you're doing well.
Yeah.
So Gwen, I'm going to turn this over to you step by step, and I'm going to have you tell me, under what circumstances do you know you start with people?
So I always look at people early because of the people who I work with, who my clients are. They tend to be, I work with women entrepreneurs, but they also tend to be strong feeler type entrepreneurs. They're very empathetic. They really care about their people, which usually means they're making bad choices about their people.
Did you just say it's bad to care about people, Gwen?
I did. I did. That's not really what I meant, but it is kind of what I said.
I'm just gonna go cry in the corner now.
Yeah, right.
All right. Okay,
so what I mean by that, it's one of the phrases that I coined a couple years ago, which I call misplaced loyalty. Is we care about our people and we want to make sure that we take care of them, but we forget that our number one priority is the health of the business, which means sometimes we have to let good people, for whatever, however you want to define good, we have to still let them go. Sometimes they're no longer able to do the job that we need. Maybe the job that they were doing when we hired them just doesn't really exist anymore, right? But if we're keeping them on because they're good and they help me get through a rough spot and, all of these things, what's happening is you're wasting money because you're, paying salaries and, whatever benefits and taxes and, all whatever happens to go with that. If you have other staff, they're getting frustrated because they're working at this level, but this person's working at this lower level, and somehow that's okay. So usually what that means is your higher level people are starting to do less valuable work. So there's a whole thing. So people I tend to look at if there is staff, if there, whether it's, part-time contracted staff, actual employees, any of those things. Because the people part is hard, and it's particularly hard for the people that want to hire me. Because I can be a real hard nose, and sometimes, that's what needs to happen. So people is a place that I look at first, because it's often a place that there are challenges. And like I said, it's one of those that most of the people I work with are making lots of assumptions, back to, the first issue, about the people, and therefore are blind to what's going on. Now, the second place that I always like to go is the prioritization piece.
Okay. So you go to priorities.
And we actually always address that. Technically, we address that first, because the first thing we do in our process when we bring in a new client is what we call our 531. We actually did one live. I did one earlier this morning. I did one yesterday. The one yesterday said, I actually listened to the one, that that you and Tonya did. And that really is the process to help get clear on, are we building the business? Are we doing the thing that we actually want to do? So, technically, we always do that first, but it's not necessarily where the problem is. Because sometimes, in that process, it just confirms everything is right on track. Sometimes it's like, oh, I was going this way, and I actually need to make this tiny bit of a shift to the left, but that little tiny bit of shift to the left will make, a big impact later on. So prioritization, and that's what I mean prioritization, is that what we're actually and we call it alignment. What we're actually doing, what's actually important to us, is where we're focusing time and energy. Now, ongoing, that's still something that we check from time to time. Like, so you're headed down this path. This is still the path you want to be on.
Yeah, that's what I was just thinking about. I was like, now that you say that out loud, I think what I see is starts with a priorities conversation, because you got to start somewhere, and you've got to start in their head, right? Because you don't know their business. Then from there, you'll go to people. And then once that gets sorted out, or when you're ready to, before you move on to the next, you kind of bounce back to priorities, do another priorities check, because when the people shift, or if there is a people problem that gets solved, sometimes it does shift the priorities.
It does. Yeah.
Then you bounce back to the next one. And so I'm going to assume next would be processes. When do you know, or when do you start? Like what has to be going on for you to know that like processes are where the root cause lies?
Well, and it's interesting because both the processes and what was the word you used?
Performance indicators.
Performance indicators. I just used metrics, and I knew that wasn't the word you used.
Yeah.
It was a P. You was very nice. You had 4 Ps. I was very impressed by that.
I used my thesaurus for this one, Gwen.
Nice job. So the performance indicators sometimes are next, and sometimes it's processes. And because sometimes the performance indicator actually indicates that it's a process problem, and sometimes the processes indicate that we're not using good performance indicators.
Right.
Like those end up getting quite a bit more entangled over time, depending on. And so a lot of times it is about what's come before. And, I use the phrase context matters all the time, but this is an example of that, is as we're starting to go through that, this is where the flags start coming up. So processes, where I usually see it for processes, often will be driven by that people piece, when we realize, oh, we're still doing it this way because Susie has been with the organization since the beginning, and the organization has transformed greatly, but we've made sure that Susie still felt comfortable in her role. To me, that's an immediate process flag, that there's probably a whole lot of stuff that we're doing to accommodate Susie and what Susie's used to, and or the way the business used to work.
Oh.
Right. So then I'm definitely going to look at processes. I'm also just going to use back to my experience and say, this feels more cumbersome than it needs to be, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the other in part of this whole conversation is understanding what is the founder-led business requiring of the founder?
Mm-hmm.
And are those things that feel founder appropriate?
Yeah.
So, years and years and years ago, one of my clients, when I went out, I found out that the way they were taking inventory was like all the inventory was in one room and they were looking at it
Mm-hmm.
to know what needed to be created next, which was fine at a certain level, but they were really wanting to grow. And it's like, you need to not be here for a month and everyone needs to still know what the next thing is that
Mm-hmm.
needs to be created. We have to take this out of you, right? And that's functionally it's a people thing, but it's also a process thing. We've got to develop a process so that others can be looking at these numbers and not just saying, well, instinctually, I know that widget A sells a lot, and so we have to keep a lot on the shelf. But widget B, we don't need nearly as much, even though technically they're both a widget.
Right.
Right. And so most people will be like, well, if we need 10 of it widget A, we must need 10 of widget B. And it's like, no, you actually need 2 of widget B, but we always need to keep at least 10 of widget A. Right.
Yeah.
That was all in someone's head.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Process issue. Right. So sometimes you can see it's like, yeah, that's in a single person's head. That is not processed,
Mm-hmm.
being processed well. But other times in the conversation, it's very much about the performance indicators. Because I'll ask questions, and there's certain questions I expect every owner to know when I ask them, without having to look it up, or if they are looking it up, they can look it up really fast and tell, like, oh, I think it's here. Wait, no, it seems like, no, it should be here. No, wait, it's one of those things like, okay, that's data everybody needs or you need, as a CEO. And the fact that you don't know that, that's a performance indicator problem. We're not paying enough attention to this number, right? So then we talk about, how are we managing that? And so sometimes it's because they actually don't know that they need that number. Fine, we can help with that. But other times it's, I don't like what that number tells me, so I don't look at it.
Sounds perfectly reasonable to me.
Uh-huh.
I don't like the number, therefore I will not look.
We all have that number, whatever that number is, right? If we don't actually get on the scale, we don't actually know how much we weigh, right?
Fair.
It doesn't change the fact that we weigh what we weigh. Whether we weigh 100 pounds or we weigh 400 pounds, being on the scale doesn't change that. We still are what we are. And if we've got some health concerns, knowing that we weigh 400 pounds is probably really important.
Right.
And knowing that, but a year ago we only weighed 350. Right? That's actually a really important number at that point. So it's one of those things of like, does this number actually matter to you and what's going on in your business? Back to, kind of the previous example of I've got a leads problem. And it's like, yeah, this doesn't actually feel like a leads problem. And it's like, oh, but I don't actually know what's happening in my bookkeeping, accounting on any sort of regular basis. I can't tell you how much we sold last month. It's like, well, then you don't know if you have a leads problem.
Right.
You think you have a leads problem. Or I know I don't have enough to pay the bills.
Right.
It's like, okay, but that's not necessarily a leads problem. That may be just that you're spending too much money.
Right. That may be that your bills are too high.
Yeah, that may be an expense problem. That's not necessarily a leads problem. That could be an expense problem. So that would be like a performance indicator piece that we're not looking at the pieces that we need to.
Okay. So generally speaking, right, like the first step oftentimes is priorities because you need a starting point. So figuring out the priorities and then going to the people and then seeing how the people stack up to the priorities.
Right.
Then whether the people situation needs to be sorted or not, right? Bouncing back to priorities and just
Well, I'm going to
making
say
sure
we're
you've got some
always
alignment.
bouncing back to
Yeah,
priority.
always bouncing back every time you're looking, just because you need a reference point.
Yeah.
And then looking at processes or performance indicators. Can you give an example of the performance indicators being wrong? Because when I think of performance indicators, I'm thinking of my measurements of success. These are the numbers that tell me whether I'm winning or losing. Is there a situation where what I think are the performance indicators to be tracking actually are not the right ones given my scenario, given my circumstances?
Yeah, all the time. There are. And I'm going to use the classic one because it's the easiest one and almost everybody deals with it.
Mm-hmm.
We look at sales, top line sales, as a key performance indicator. And not that it's not one that we should track, because we should.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But we use that as an end all performance indicator often. For the real performance indicator is the profit number.
Mm-hmm.
I know of several folks who had a nice, $300,000, $400,000 a year business who got very excited about building $1 million business. And the thing was, when they were at $300,000, they were profiting $100,000 a year.
Yeah.
Okay. They built it to $1 million and they were losing $100,000 a year. Right. But when we talk about it, which sounds better, $1 million business or a $300,000 business? Well, $1 million business sounds like a way better business, when in fact, that's a real big lie.
Yeah.
I mean, it could be, not saying that it has to be that way, but it can be. So that's one of those indicators that we need to know, but we need to know it in relation to other numbers. It's not a good enough number by itself.
Mm-hmm.
We need to know where else it's what else it's being related to. And so profit to me profit by itself often is a reasonable indicator. But I also like to know what that number is as a percentage of the sales number, because that also tells us other things. Some industries that should be a fairly high percentage. For others, a profit of just a few percentage points is actually considered really, really healthy.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so so it's looking at the numbers and saying, how do they all relate to one another? And I think that's the biggest issue with almost all indicators, is we often look at them in isolation, not in relation to the other numbers that it makes sense. I mean, taking a marketing example, people will look at open rate and say, well, my open rate is X. And it's like, okay, even, and there's lots of discussion about open rates aren't very accurate in the first place, but let's just pretend like they were. Let's pretend like they were like spot on. Open rate doesn't mean they read it.
Right. Or that they understood it.
Or that they understood it.
Applied to them.
Right. I mean, like there's a whole lot of things there, right? But if we say, oh, but I've got a 40% open rate, and everyone's like, woohoo, then you must have a great system. But if they're all going to people who are just below poverty level and you have a $10,000 a month offer, they may still open it because they may find what you're saying really interesting, but they're not ever going to buy. Your 40% open rate is useless.
Right.
Right. So it needs to be in context with other numbers. And I think that's the piece of understanding what numbers actually make sense and how they relate to other numbers. And I think that's where most people lose it, is they look at a number here, a number there, a number in this other place, and don't look at them in context.
Yeah. So as our time comes to a close, if somebody at a networking event, because I know you like people, were to come up to you, right? And they don't have the benefit of this episode because this episode has not yet come out. And they say, Gwen Bortner, how can I tell what my business actually needs next? What would be your one sentence answer for them?
this is going to sound snotty, but I would say, where's the place that you don't want to look?
Oh, that's good. So you would say, where is the place you don't want to look? And they would answer probably they'd probably walk away because that just sounds mean when you've just met them. But right,
like I said, that sounds really snotty, but I know what you're trying to get to.
Yeah. But
so
somebody listening, right?
Yeah.
Somebody listening could say, they'll probably run that through their head because I think this is a good finishing point for the episode. Yeah. And now that you've listened, I think you know whether it is your priorities, your processes, your people, your performance indicators. And at the very least, check your priorities. Then ask yourself, where do I not want to look next? That is probably your starting point in terms of figuring out what your business actually needs next. And I would say that if you want to sharpen your ability to quickly diagnose what your business needs from you and to lead with wisdom, the best next step for you is Gwen's weekly question, right? Go to everydayeffectiveness.com/question, sign up there, and every Friday, a question from Gwen magically, through the power of automation, lands in your inbox. And you can answer it internally, you can journal your answer, or you can reply to Gwen with your answer. You reply to Gwen, she'll actually answer back. You write it in your journal. We don't know what you wrote, so we don't say anything to you after that. And guess what? Next Friday, another question lands in your inbox. It's another micro step toward figuring out what your business needs from you. So go to everydayeffectiveness.com/question, sign up there, and we will see you next time. Thanks for tuning in to The Business You Really Want with Gwen Bortner. I'm Tonya Kubo, reminding you that sustainable success is within reach. Make sure to subscribe to the show and visit thebusinessyoureallyWant.com for more resources. Until next time, keep dreaming big and acting with intention.